Hello and welcome to my channel Akash Entertainment. This is the second video intended for the HS second year students of JHNS College. We were discussing the lesson Indigo by Louis Fisher. Today we will be discussing from here. Gandhi decided to go first to Muzaffarpur, which was en route to Champaran, to obtain more complete information about the conditions than Shukla was capable of imparting. He accordingly sent a telegram to Professor J.B. Kripalani of Arch College in Muzaffarpur, whom he had seen at Tagore's Shantiniketan school. So Gandhi was heading from Calcutta to Champaran with Rajkumar Shukla, and on the way they stopped at a place called Muzaffarpur, and Muzaffarpur was a place which comes in between Calcutta and Champaran, and there he sent a telegram to Professor J.B. Kripalani, who was working at the time at Arch College in Muzaffarpur, and Gandhi knew him because they met at Tagore's Santiniketan. The train arrived at midnight on 15 April 1917. Kripalani was sitting at the station with a large body of students. Gandhi stayed there for 2 days in a home of Professor Malkani, a teacher in a government school. It was an extraordinary thing in those days, Gandhi commented, for a government professor to harbor a man like me. In smaller localities, the Indians were afraid to show sympathy for advocates of home rule. So he arrived there on 15 April 1917, and J.B. Kripalani was waiting for Mahatma Gandhi at the station with a large number of students. And Gandhi told Fisher that it was very extraordinary, it was very remarkable that a man who was a government servant, who was working at a government school, was harboring, was giving shelter to Mahatma Gandhi, who was fighting against the government itself, the British government itself. So that was very extraordinary and that was very remarkable because people uh, were afraid to show sympathy for the freedom fighters during that time. The news of Gandhi's advent and of the nature of his mission spread quickly through Muzaffarpur and to Champaran. Sharecroppers arriving on foot, sharecroppers from Champaran began arriving on foot and by conveyance to see their champion. Muzaffarpur lawyers called on Gandhi to brief him. They frequently represented uh, peasant groups in court. They told him about their cases and reported the size of their fee. So when Gandhi came to Muzaffarpur, the news spread through the place and also to Champaran. From Champaran, sharecroppers came to see Mahatma Gandhi because he was already a hero for them. He was already a champion for them because he was going there in order to fight their cause, in order to fight for their justice. And at the same time, lawyers from Muzaffarpur also came to him in order to tell him how frequently they presented the cases of the peasants in the court and how much fee they used to charge for that. Gandhi chided the lawyers for collecting big fee from the sharecroppers. He said, I have come to the conclusion that we should stop going to law courts. Taking such cases to the courts does little good. The way the peasants are so crushed and fear stricken, law courts are useless. The real relief for them is to be free from fear. Gandhi himself was a lawyer. He was a barrister from London, as you know. And Gandhi didn't like what the lawyers from Muzaffarpur told him, and he chided them. He was rebuking them because of the big fee that they used to collect from the poor peasants. He said them that for him the law courts, as he saw, was useless, because law courts were not able to give justice to the poor peasants. On the one hand, they were crushed by the landlord system, sharecropping system, and at the same time, they were also being oppressed by the lawyers by charging them a high amount of fee. So, the primary duty of the court was not achieved. The primary purpose of the courts were not achieved or served, because the aim of the court was to give justice to them, but then it was unable to give, as it appeared to Mahatma Gandhi. So he chided them. Most of the arable lands in Champaran district was divided into large estates owned by the Englishmen and worked by Indian tenants. The chief commercial crop was indigo. The landlords compelled all tenants to plant 3/20 or 15% of their holdings with indigo and surrender the entire indigo harvest as rent. This was done by long-term contract. So the land in Champaran, most of the arable land, most of the cultivable land, where uh, it was occupied by the owned by the British landlords, and they used to give the land for cultivation to the poor Indian peasants, but then they had to sign a long term contract agreement in which it was written that they would do 3/20 or 15% uh, of cultivation uh, with indigo crop, and they will have to surrender the entire harvest of indigo to the British landlords. Presently, the landlords learned that Germany had developed synthetic indigo. They thereupon obtained agreements from the sharecroppers to pay them compensation for being released from the 15% arrangement. So, the British people came to know that Germany had already produced synthetic indigo, and which was much cheaper, and they knew that they would not be able to compete with their own products, and therefore they wanted to make another agreement with the sharecroppers by uh, taking compensation for them for freeing that 15% of land. The sharecropping arrangement was irksome to the peasants, and many signed willingly. Those who resisted engaged lawyers. The landlords hired thugs. Meanwhile, the information about the synthetic indigo reached the illiterate peasants who had signed, and they wanted their money back. So, for the peasants, it was very irksome to do the sharecropping, as they had to surrender all the 15% of that entire 15% lands crop to the British people. So many peasants, they willingly surrendered their agreements. They signed the new agreement. But then those who did not want to uh, sign, those who did not want it to uh, come to the new agreement, they hired lawyers, and at the same time, the government or the British landlord, they were also not sitting silently. They also appointed certain thugs so that they can uh, have the new agreements signed by the peasants. At this point, Gandhi arrived in Champaran. So Gandhi arrived at that type of a situation.